The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the webinar today, Scholarship Innovation, How Funders and Communities Are Meeting the Needs of Today's Students. I'm your host, Kathy McDonald, Assistant Director of Network Partnerships with the Florida College Access Network. I'm thrilled to welcome on our call today Dr. Paul Perrault, Vice President and Director of Research and Evaluation for Helios Education Foundation. Dr. Perrault leads the research and evaluation agenda around Helios's three impact areas of early grade success, college and career readiness, and post-secondary completion. Dr. Perrault comes to Helios with nearly 10 years of research and evaluation experience. Prior to joining Helios, he was a research faculty member at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, where he served as a lead investigator on Arizona's Move On When Ready evaluation and as a principal investigator on UMa's Ready Now evaluation. Dr. Perrault received his PhD in Educational Foundations and Policy with a specialization in research methodology at the University of Michigan. Michelle Beam is a research and evaluation analyst under the Policy Research and Evaluation Center of Excellence, where she conducts research and evaluation activities to inform and support the Foundation's strategic investment initiatives. Prior to joining Helios Education Foundation, Ms. Beam led evaluations of child welfare, adult criminal, and juvenile justice and education programs in the government and nonprofit sector. She earned a master's degree in educational psychology from Arizona University. Let me advance our slides here. Whoops. Sorry, let me pull us back up. Okay. There they are. Okay, so let's do a little housekeeping before we get started. First, we welcome your questions. This is all about learning together, so please submit your questions in the box, which you should see on the right side of your screen if you're viewing from a desktop computer. We will allot time at the end of today's calls for our guest presenters to answer questions, but you can submit them at any time. Second, please share what you are learning on your favorite social media platform using the hashtags FCAN and Scholarship Innovation. You can also find us on Twitter at FL College Access and Helios at Helios EDFND. Finally, this webinar is being recorded. All materials will be available within a week of the recording, but you can find the handouts now in the handout section of your control panel on the right. There you'll see a link to Helios's Beyond Traditional Scholarships brief, which the material from today's webinar is based on. You'll see a handout on financial aid lessons from the field, which shares what funders and institutions have found to be the most effective strategies in helping meet students' financial needs while pursuing a post-secondary credential. You'll also see a one-page handout on what is Promise Scholarships. And finally, you'll also find the slides in your handout section. Now, I know we have quite a few new listeners on the call today who may be new to FCAN's work. So let me give you a little bit of background on who we are before we get started. FCAN's mission is to create and strengthen a statewide network that catalyzes and supports communities to improve college and career readiness, access, and completion for all students. Our vision is to see 60% of working-age Floridians hold a high-quality post-secondary degree or credential by the year 2025 in order to meet growing workforce demands. We accomplish our work in three primary ways. First, we support the formation and growth of local college access networks, which are multi-sector strategic alliances collaborating to ensure more students succeed in preparing for tomorrow's jobs. The majority of jobs in the next decade will require education beyond high school, and LCANs help students by fostering partnerships between educational institutions, community organizations, business leaders, government, and philanthropy. 78.3% of the state is now supported by an LCAN, a multi-sector approach to college and career readiness. Second, FCAN's research, data, and policy work consists of producing student-centered research and policy analysis acting as a clearinghouse for college and career readiness, access and completion data, and finally, developing local, state, and national partnerships and policy alignment around degree attainment. Finally, is our College Ready Florida statewide initiatives. We now have over 300 high schools throughout the state participating in at least one of our statewide initiatives to help students get into college and afford the education beyond high school that supports their goals. These initiatives include in the fall our Apply Yourself Florida College Application Week, the Florida FAFSA Challenge, which is going on now, and you can find dashboards on our website to learn more. And finally, in the spring, the Florida College Decision Day. Okay, so to get us started, we're going to start by looking at the challenges with traditional scholarship models. But let me see if we can get a poll started to tell us, have you offered scholarships through your current organization? So if you can go ahead and vote now and submit your answers. Give it a couple more seconds. We've got about half of you voted so far. One more sec. Okay, so I'm going to close that out. And it looks like about 70% of you, 76% of you, it keeps growing, currently offer scholarships. So that's great. So we're learning together here in terms of not only what we're currently offering, but hopefully learning some new opportunities here. Okay, to get us started, now let's set the stage for today's topic, starting with what are some of the challenges. For funders, scholarship criteria can be too narrow to market effectively. Some donors may specify criteria that's too narrow to attract a sufficient application pool. Second, tracking outcomes are difficult. You know, the whole point of offering scholarships is hopefully to help students complete or earn a credential. Donors want their legacies in terms of scholarships to matter. They hope their support will help a student graduate and start a successful career. And ideally, those scholarships will provide students with the needed support to complete the degree or certificate they seek. Yet tracking these outcomes is difficult. And finally, the administrative costs can be expensive, especially relative to the small fund sizes. And for students, scholarships rarely cover all the expenses for their full program, especially when a credential spans a number of years. It can leave students scrambling for funding each year and can lead to a student stopping out before finishing a credential while they work to line up more financial support. Or it can lead to a student taking on a part-time or full-time job, which research shows impacts their ability to complete their credential. Finally, students also face non-academic challenges such as housing insecurity, food scarcity, transportation, childcare, and health challenges for themselves or their family that traditional scholarships typically don't cover. So when we begin to think beyond the traditional scholarships, a number of questions come up that help us to begin to look at what's the landscape telling us. Those who provide scholarships are looking for better and more effective ways to ensure financial supports lead to credential attainment. There's the opportunity to be more strategic with scholarships, to consider using the funding to drive specific outcomes, for instance, such as a student completing a developmental education course. It's also important to consider what the funder's goals are in providing a scholarship. Are they hoping to open more doors for student populations that tend to be underrepresented in school? Are they looking to support the best and brightest? And what's the right ratio of needs versus merit-based aid? With the changing and often non-academic financial needs of today's students, face, there are better models. Are there better models to provide scholarships in a way that serves students more effectively so they can persist in completion? Finally, savvy funders are exploring whether funding is enough given the life challenges some students face and look to models that can take a holistic approach to student needs. To help us better understand the landscape of how creative funders are testing alternative models, we are pleased to have Paul and Michelle share what they found in preparing their brief beyond traditional scholarships. So let me turn the controls over to Paul and Michelle. And Paul and Michelle, are you able to pull your slides up?
Yep, we should be 1 second.
Very good. The floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We're glad to be here and glad to be a part of this work, which we find to be really interesting and exciting as we all think about the same types of goals of improving college access and post-secondary access for students. I would be remiss not to thank Kathy for all the great work that she did in putting this together, and really all of our partners that helped us put this work and think about these ideas at both FCAN, but especially Kathy McDonald, Lori Megazin, and Troy Miller at FCAN, and then Bob McFalls at FPN, who've really been good thought partners as we actually did this work and researched it as a team to put this together. And so thank you again, everybody, for the great help and work in doing this. So I wanted to just identify kind of the main goals that Michelle and I will be talking about today about this presentation. First, we wanted to identify the best practices from prior research on scholarship giving and effectiveness. So we wanted to start that way so we could understand what could we find out there? What's been put into place? What have scholars and researchers looked at to see what are the best practices that will actually give us, really the best bang for our buck when it's scholarship giving? How should we give that money? What are those kind of traits that lead to more successful scholarship giving? And so we'll talk about that. Then I wanted us to talk about understanding challenges and limitations to traditional scholarship giving. So building off the work that Kathy talked about, what are some other things other funders have identified as challenges around those scholarship giving as well? And then finally, learn about new and innovative ways foundations and community organizations are serving their communities. While we all might have the same common goal of improving post-secondary access, getting especially higher poverty, minority students access, or those students who haven't traditionally been well served access to complete or to persist and complete, we might have different communities and groups that we're serving based upon where our organizations are currently. So we really want to talk about how that actually impacts works as well. So a little bit about the organization that Michelle and I work for. We are both located in Arizona, but both work in Florida as well. We serve both states really to enrich the lives of individuals in both Florida and Arizona by creating opportunities for success in post-secondary education. And a little bit of background about our organization. About 13 years ago, our parent corporation was a student lending corporation. As they sold out and moved away from lending as things went to federal direct and student loan, we actually took and endowed a little over $800 million to serve both Arizona and Florida, the two states where we service the most loans. And that's why we're so ingrained in this work, and that's why this work is so important to us. We also wanted to think about this as what are we trying to do with scholarship giving? And Kathy talked a little bit about, workforce needs in Florida and actually preparing students for the workforce needs. So Florida and any of the states that we operate in can be successful. Anywhere that you look from 2020 to 2030, there's tremendous increases in the type of education background that students will need. Anywhere from 65 to 70% of new jobs are going to require at least some post-secondary attainment rates. And if we look at where we currently are, this graphic that I have up, the last bar, excuse me, shows the total population in Florida right now at 38% have an associate's or higher. Now, that does not include certificates and other credentials that can be connected in there. Those are definitely much harder to measure, but it does show us a picture of where we see there's some big differences. For example, while the white population is currently at 40% associates or higher, we see that African Americans at 28%, Native Americans at 29%, and Latinos at 33%. And why that's important, because those populations, especially our Latino population and African American population in Florida, are growing. And so we're going to have to figure out how we give those students more access to post-secondary education so that they can be part of that workforce drive that we're trying to meet. The other problems can be unique and they can be common. So currently, scholarship models may not be tailored to fit unique community needs. So if you have a population that really might struggle to stay in college or persist, for example, if they have unexpected medical needs or car issues or something, and then they drop out and there's no kind of scholarship programs to help them in those needs, well, then that may not be, your scholarship model may not be tailored in a way that's serving your students' needs. Other scholarship programs also sometimes connect and serve things such as parking, additional kind of food and snacks and those things, especially in communities that might not have those as much as those resources. So, you know, that's one problem that has been identified in the field and in our interviews that we'll talk about as well. Financial aid falls short for traditionally underrepresented students. So, you know, we see, you know, more money allocated for loans. We see that other things that are out there don't get covered because they don't fall into a financial aid package. So, you know, sometimes we're looking at fixing that problem by having scholarship that might fit those specific needs. And then scholarships designed for incoming first-year students are not constructed to support retention and completion. So it's kind of that model of if we get them in the door, they will stay. And a number of groups have tried this. And what we see in the past and in the literature is some of those students might not be able to make it in that second year or third year because of the loss of that scholarship. And so how can we look at the scholarship programs that are out there connected with the research to really think about not only how do we give students access, you know, right out of high school, but how do we make sure that they're retained after the first year and that ultimately they complete to become models in the workforce. So just a little bit about our research before we dive into the kind of domains that we're going to talk about. So our goal in setting this research up with the Florida College Access Network and the Florida Philanthropic Network was really to explore opportunities to expand community foundation products to engage new and existing donors in funding innovative post-secondary access and attainment programs beyond just the traditional scholarship. And how do we do this? Well, first we undertook just literature reviews. You know, what could we find out there? And there's a lot of information and materials, especially on scholarships and grants and financial aid in certain ways. But unfortunately, that information is spread across, you know, a number of areas. There isn't kind of an anthology of this is the kind of scholarship giving research or financial aid research that can be beneficial. But we started with that, the traditional research. Then we moved, as we moved into that traditional research, we also found that there was lots of holes. They didn't talk about a lot of the scholarships like we're going to talk about today. For example, like promise scholarships or emergency scholarships. These scholarships are really new and innovative. And because they're new and innovative, there isn't a lot of information out there. And you'll see as we talk through these scholarships, in places where there are research studies that have actually meant to judge the impact of these, we'll talk about those. But a number of these scholarship programs we'll talk about today are really new and developing, and we're not at the stage yet of having that research to really identify how the total effectiveness of it. So we can talk about that today. So after we did those research and literature reviews, as a group, we identified a number of foundations and organizations that we would talk to and set up interviews with their scholarship and community engagement teams. With those, we talked about a number of different programs that these organizations had in place. And then we also had a series of questions of what other kind of scholarships and programs are out there that you're seeing in the field in your work when you're meeting with other foundations and organizations. So it was almost like an ancestry tree, I guess. We started with this base group of people, Then from that group of people, we also expanded our network of interviews and focus groups, really mostly interviews, based upon the information we were receiving from other interviewees. Then after that was completed, we kind of created a set of domains. We're going to talk about those 4 domains today of scholarship giving that really have expanded. And then at the end, we'll also highlight just a few other really neat areas of scholarship giving that don't fit into those areas so clean, but that other groups are really trying to implement. So with that, we'd love, please, if you have any questions, submit them through the chat. Michelle and I are excited about walking us through these main research domains and helping you think through this in your work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Great, thank you, Paul. So before we decided to conduct these interviews and delve deeply into the different types of unique scholarship models, we really wanted to take a look at the broader research in order to identify just generally what are some best practices in administering and designing a scholarship. And what we found really, according to the research, is that scholarship models are most effective when first they're renewable. So when they're not really that one-time deal the student receives at the beginning of their freshman year, but rather when the student is eligible to continue to receive funding throughout the duration of their college career, they're more likely to persist. They're also most effective when they're predictable. So the students are aware of what's out there and what it takes to get the scholarships. And this really comes down to early awareness, as early as middle school or even younger. Scholarship models are also most effective when they're simple and transparent. So a good rule of thumb here is that the scholarship should be able to be explained to the student in just one sentence. Models are also most effective when they are designed to supplement rather than replace institutional funds, when they incorporate incentives for academic success. So for example, if they're tied to the student achieving a certain GPA or accumulating a certain number of credit hours. And then finally, and this is particularly beneficial for low-income students and first-generation students, scholarship models are most effective when they're tied to non-financial support services. So this includes, kind of that holistic wraparound type approach that includes things like counseling or peer mentoring. When we looked at the broader research, we were also interested in finding out kind of what is that magic number in terms of scholarship dollars and boosting post-secondary enrollment. And what we found, according to the research, is that each $1,000 in scholarship aid has shown a 3 to 5 point percentage increase in post-secondary enrollment. And obviously, this is even more effective if the scholarship aid is renewable from semester to semester or from year to year. Additionally, research supports students being enrolled full-time in order to persist and complete. And this is typically defined as taking at least 12 credit hours per semester. However, some research and many organizations are now promoting students take 15 credit hours per semester in order to complete their degree on time. So post-secondary institutions have really done a much better job in increasing access to traditionally underserved students, such as low-income, minority, and first-generation students. However, once these students get in the door, many of them have to juggle work and school simultaneously in order to make ends meet. And they don't really have access to backup financial resources. And so if the student were to face something small like a car repair or even a medical bill, this could be enough to force them to drop out of school. And so emergency scholarships are really designed in order to address this problem. They're designed to help students facing an unexpected financial hardship that threatens their ability to persist or complete. These are typically one-time small grants. They don't have to be repaid by the student. Usually they're around $1,500 or less. Sometimes they can also take the form of completion scholarships. Completion scholarships are kind of just a spin on emergency scholarships. They're designed more for students who are toward the end of their college career, usually a year or a semester away from graduating, and they have some kind of financial gap that they need help in order to persist and complete. So currently, there are about 100 emergency scholarship programs that are in operation across the country. And when we took a look at the different scholarship programs, we found that eligibility criteria tends to vary pretty widely. However, there are some common characteristics that many of these programs have. The first, of course, is that they require students demonstrate financial need in order to receive the emergency scholarship funding. And this is oftentimes defined as being Pell eligible. Many programs also have some form of an application process that the student must complete, as well as documentation that the student must provide in order to prove that he or she is indeed facing some type of unforeseen financial emergency. Some programs also require that the student has accumulated a certain number of credit hours or have a certain GPA in order to be eligible to receive the emergency scholarship funding. And then finally, some programs require that the student be enrolled at least part-time to receive the funding, whereas other programs may require that the student be enrolled full-time. So what are the advantages of emergency scholarship programs? As you can imagine, they really serve to decrease the blow of a financial crisis on student post-secondary success, and they really serve as that safety net for persistence and completion. What's unique about some emergency scholarship programs is that they also incorporate, in addition to emergency scholarship funding, non-financial support services. So this can include things like personal and financial literacy counseling. One program that's specific to Florida that is a great example of a program that incorporates both financial aid as well as non-financial support services is Destination Graduation, which takes place at Seminole State College in partnership with the Heart of Florida United Way. This program not only provides emergency scholarship aid, but also links students to resources within the community, such as food banks or homeless shelters. And so if you're interested in learning more about emergency scholarships, I would definitely direct you to the Destination Graduation website. So one of the oldest and largest emergency scholarship programs in operation is called the Dreamkeepers Emergency Financial Assistance Program. This program is administered by Scholarship America and currently has about 40 community college partners across the country. Hillsborough Community College is one of those partners. This program is funded by both philanthropic as well as state matching dollars. The average grant that a student typically receives in this program is about $445. Which is most commonly applied toward those basic life necessities such as housing, utilities, meals, transportation, car repairs, and childcare. And so an evaluation of the Dreamkeepers Emergency Financial Assistance Program was actually conducted, and it was found that 95% of individuals who received an emergency scholarship completed the term in which they were enrolled, and 88% enrolled in the following term. And so here you can see that a pretty insignificant amount of money, only about $445, can really have a significant impact in helping low-income students stay in school. So here we've kind of compiled a list of considerations that you may want to keep in mind if you're thinking about designing or administering your own emergency scholarship program. The first is, at the forefront, it's really important to define what an emergency entails. How will you define that? What is your eligibility criteria? So will students have to have a certain GPA in order to be eligible to receive the emergency scholarship funding, or maybe they must have accumulated a certain number of credit hours? What will your application process look like? How will you distribute funds? So for example, will you disperse funds in the form of a gift card perhaps? Or maybe will you have the ability to provide funds directly to a third party, such as a landlord, who can assist a student in paying their rent? How will you market the program and ensure that your target population is aware that it exists and that it is a great resource for them to take advantage of if they need it? How will you ensure sustainability of funding? And then finally, of course, how will you collect data and continuously evaluate your program in order to ensure that it is effective? The second type of innovative scholarships that we'll be talking about today in this webinar are called performance-based scholarships. And these are also designed specifically for low-income students. Performance-based scholarships are defined as financial aid for low-income students contingent on completion of certain academic benchmarks. So again, if the student meets a certain GPA requirement or accumulates a certain number of credit hours, then he or she is eligible to receive the funding. So this really incentivizes good academic behavior and on-time completion. What's really unique about performance-based scholarships is that they're paid directly to students, and this can be really advantageous for those low-income students who need help with things like transportation or childcare, or things like that. Another unique characteristic is that performance-based scholarships are typically dispersed in multiple increments throughout the term. And so this is really designed so that students, really to prevent them from running out of money as they progress throughout the semester and help them manage their money more effectively. Performance-based scholarships are also designed to supplement other financial aid. So they really are meant to kick in after federal and state aid has been applied. In terms of eligibility and renewal, again, students must demonstrate that they are low income. This is typically in terms of Pell eligibility. And then in order to receive the funds, the student must meet a certain GPA requirement and or course credit requirement. So what are the advantages of performance-based scholarships? They really help to ease the financial burden on low-income students and hopefully decrease their reliance on having to work as they attend college. They're designed to incentivize persistence, and then they're also designed to incentivize on-time completion, especially if they're tied to the student needing to complete a certain number of credit hours to receive the funding. And then finally, again, they encourage students to make better financial decisions in the way that they're designed, in which the student receives the funding in multiple increments throughout the semester. So MDRC, which is a large research organization, if you are not familiar with them, they conducted a large-scale evaluation of performance-based scholarships across 6 states, and they found some pretty promising results. They found that compared to a control group, students receiving a performance-based scholarship were more likely to meet academic benchmarks. They earned more college credits by the end of the first year. They received better grades. And interestingly, this was especially true among students who historically had lower high school GPAs. And then in Ohio, which was the first state in which the evaluation was extended long enough to look at this, it was found that students who received performance-based scholarships were more likely to earn a degree or certificate compared to students who did not receive a performance-based scholarship. So again, we see some really interesting and promising findings here. So this slide kind of shows a map of some different performance-based scholarships that have been administered across the country toward different types of populations of low-income students. So you can see here it's ranged from populations like low-income Latino males in Arizona to low-income students who are parents, to low-income students who require developmental coursework. So one program that I just want to briefly highlight is called the Mathematics Access Performance Scholarship Program, or MAPS, which took place at 2 campuses at Hillsborough Community College. This program is specifically designed for students who required 3 course sequence of math remedial coursework. So essentially the way that this program operated was that when a student signed up for a course in the sequence, they received $100. Once they successfully completed the course with a C or better, they received an additional $500. If they received a B or better, they also received a textbook voucher for the following course in the sequence. And then students were also encouraged to utilize on-campus math tutoring labs. And so a rigorous evaluation of this program was also conducted, and it was found that students enrolled in the MAPS program were more likely to complete the 3-course sequence on time, they achieved better grades, and they also were more likely to utilize those on-campus math tutoring labs. So again, we see some really promising results of these performance-based scholarships in helping low-income students succeed. And now I'd like to turn it back over to Paul, who will be talking about wraparound scholarships.
Great, thank you. So many of the scholarships that we've been talking about in the past, even with traditional scholarships, have really been focused around access. And we saw a number of the scholarships that we kind of focused on and talked with people about at other philanthropic organizations and foundations, really focused on that. But then we started seeing that a lot of these organizations at the same time were seeing that because they had access didn't mean that the kids actually stayed and persisted and completed. And so there's a new trend that's been developing around wraparound scholarships. And so around the country, we've seen states and school districts and philanthropy focus on preparing students for college, but what happened after they got there? And the wraparound scholarships is really where we see this new development going. And that wraparound scholarships can have a number of characteristics, from mentoring at college, for example, like peer mentors based on background or community, We saw that in a number of places, like especially you could be from a minority group, and maybe you have you're Latino and you have a Latino mentor or an African American mentor, somebody that might be from your community, from your own neighborhood, that's going to a university as well. Academic tutoring, academic and career counseling, internship placement. So giving people an opportunity to actually get into the job workforce and have some opportunities before they graduate to build their networks. In Arizona, for example, Maricopa Excel is a great program, and again, we really highlight that. Look to our brief. There'll be a bunch of links on there and programs that you can explore further. Maricopa Excel being one of those programs that does all of these, and even provides like a food bank and other kinds of things and bus passes, similar to what we saw and work around the State University of New York. Right in Florida, though, the Johnson Scholarship Foundation is a very strong candidate of someone to search and look around their wraparound support services. Highly known in Florida for their work. They kind of were a very interesting group that provides wraparound support services to keep kids that actually make it to post-secondary, to keep them there so that they can persist and complete. Some additional ones that we're not going to highlight, but these ones were, met kind of our stronger. We kind of highlighted some that were stronger and we thought were more productive. For example, the Accelerated Study and Associate Programs, ASAP is one. Excuse me. The Ann Arbor Community Scholarship Foundation is a really good example of wraparound support services. The Suter Foundation First Scholars Program, and then 1 Million Degrees. So if you really were interested in these, I would say follow up with the Johnson Scholarship Foundation and the Maricopa Excel. Give you 6 really good examples of how organizations and universities are working together to support students once they get to college. And the last category that we're really focused on in the domains is really exploded over the last 10 years, really. And those are Promise Scholarships. And Promise Scholarships are institutional or place-based initiatives that address the challenge of higher education affordability by offering funding for students who live in the program's geographic area. And the first one of these that was put in place was actually in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and which was a unique perspective, and it was by an anonymous donor at that time of basically allowing kids that graduated from Kalamazoo public schools to go to any public college in the state of Michigan, and it would be paid for. Now, the way that they did it, it was kind of they had a number of requirements, but the biggest requirement was the time you spent in the school. So if you went all 4 years of high school there, you would get 4 years of a post-secondary education. If you went 3 years, you would get 3 years. And so it was really based upon the amount of time that you actually spent in school. Today, there are more than 150 Promise programs in 37 states. And some of those programs are really Promise programs that are kind of state level. For example, in Tennessee, having community college is really a Promise program, or in Oregon, a technical college. Many of these programs can have requirements, but most of them I would say are minimal. They really want to get the population that they want to serve. So that minimum high school attendance we're talking about, you have to worry about that. Some people might just try to move in for the senior year, and so that's why it's proportional, usually, Promise scholarships. Some may require completion of college preparatory requirements, a certain GPA, certain level of attendance in high school, and the completion of a career plan is really developed. Lots of the Promise scholarships want that. They would like students to actually enter college or post-secondary with a plan, be connected with the type of programs that they feel that they can actually excel in, so that they're not spending 2 or 3 years trying to figure out what they want to do in college. There's been that rapid expansion that we talked about, especially in California. California has done a lot of work and research, especially West Ed, around Promise scholarships. At least 23 programs in California. Again, another example, the Long Beach College Promise creates college going culture early, free year tuition at Long Beach Community College, guaranteed admission down the road, and academic and college counseling. And in Florida has recently expanded to this Promise scholarships as well at Florida State College at Jacksonville. And so to be eligible for that, you'd have to live in Duval or Nassau County, and be graduating from the public high school, a first-time college student and be Pell eligible. And again, like so many of these, we can't stress enough, you have renewable opportunities. But connected with that, developing an academic degree plan with student success advisor, maintaining a GPA of only a 2.0. Again, these Promise scholarships typically have more minimal requirements. They want people to make it through and get through. And then they require 60 hours of community service. So they want you to give back to that community as part of the overall promise around that work. I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle, and she's going to talk about some other innovative scholarships.
Thanks, Paul. So this slide shows some additional types of unique scholarships that we came across when we were conducting our interviews and our research that don't fit neatly into any of the aforementioned categories, but we thought were worthy of highlighting in this webinar. The first are called re-entry scholarships. These are designed for students who began their college career. They dropped out, and this type of scholarship really incentivizes them to come back and complete their schooling. And so typically these programs, or the scholarship is for individuals between the ages of 25 and 50 years of age who have been out of school for at least 5 years. And typically these individuals must also demonstrate financial need. One great example of a reentry scholarship is the OSHA Reentry Scholarship Program. So if you're interested in learning more specifically about this type of scholarship, I would definitely direct you to their website. The second type of interesting and very unique and novel scholarship that we came across are called reverse scholarships. Reverse scholarships are currently springing up in communities that typically suffer from an outmigration of talent. And so actually they are targeting students who have recently graduated college to come back to their local community, work and contribute to the local economy in exchange for paying that student loan debt to the lien holder on a quarterly basis. So the Community Foundation of St. Clair County in Michigan was actually the first organization to implement this type of scholarship. And then there's another program that has also recently gained traction in Ohio. These are very new, so there has not really been much research at this point on their effectiveness, but this is something that we're definitely looking forward to seeing more about in the future. And then the final type of innovative scholarship that we'll be discussing are micro scholarships, which are typically small scholarships, usually around $100 or less. One great example of a unique micro scholarship program is called Raise.me, which is an online platform that colleges and universities can sign up for. And then students in high school as early as 9th grade kind of receive promises of these micro scholarships from colleges or universities for things like extracurricular activities, good grades in high school, and good attendance in high school. And then once the student graduates from high school, if he or she decides to attend that college or university, then he or she is able to apply those promised funds towards the cost of attending that college or university. Again, this is also a pretty novel concept. There is little research on this at this point, but we're definitely looking forward to seeing the effectiveness of micro scholarships like Raise.me. So as we wrap up this portion of the webinar today, I just want to leave you with some important questions to consider when designing your own innovative scholarship program. The first is, at the forefront, it's really important to consider what problem you're really trying to solve. Secondly, it's important to look at your community and your target population and really assess their needs and determine how they are unique and how you are going to tailor your scholarship program in order to best meet their needs. And then finally, how will you measure if your work is making an impact? How will you make sure that you're collecting data and continuously utilizing that data in order to make real-time changes in improving the effectiveness of your program? So we will have some time for questions and answers today in the webinar, but I just wanted to provide my contact information as well as Paul's contact information. If anyone has any outstanding questions after the webinar has concluded, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. We would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And now I'd like to turn it back over to Kathy.
Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate it. Let me try and get my screen back up here. There, perfect. Okay, so the floor is now open for questions. Please submit your questions in the box in your control panel. In the meantime, let's do a quick poll. You just heard several innovative scholarship options. First, I'd like to see you all vote for which of the innovative scholarship models that Paul and Michelle shared have you tried? So go ahead and participate now. I see votes coming through. Great. Almost there. We're about a third of 40% of the way there. Give us a couple more seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and close that out. And let's share the results with you all. It's looking like performance-based scholarships, we've had some experience with that among our callers, and not quite half of you have not yet tried scholarship models, but hopefully got some good options to consider. Okay, let's go to one more. Which of the scholarship models that you heard about today are you thinking about trying? Go ahead and vote. Give it a couple more seconds here. Okay, let's go ahead and close that one out, and then let's share those results with you all. So it's looking like we're still not sure, but we've got some potential interest in emergency scholarships, performance-based scholarships, and wraparound. So a little bit of everything. It sounds like it's looking like many of you are still in that information gathering mode. So that's terrific. Okay, so Michelle and Paul shared their various options. Go ahead and submit your questions anytime. To get us started, Michelle and Paul, you had talked about things like funding like a paycheck, and yet one of the things we hear often is that you know, a lot of students today simply don't know the basics of financial literacy. You know, have you seen any of the models tied to financial literacy as far as them actually building in some training and support around that in order to help these students not only get the money, but know how to manage it well?
Sure, Kathy. So inherently in the performance-based scholarships we talked about a little bit earlier in the presentation today, those are structured so that the student receives multiple disbursements of financial aid throughout the term, which is really structured to help them learn how to manage their money more effectively. Another program that we didn't specifically talk about in the webinar today, but it's in our brief if you're interested in taking a look, is called Aid Like a Paycheck. And Aid Like a Paycheck historically has been used with federal and state aid. Basically, once a student's aid has been dispersed and covers their tuition, then the remaining amount of funds that they're entitled to are distributed to the student every 2 weeks like a paycheck. Hopefully so that the student can learn to associate hard work and completion of course credits with kind of receiving a paycheck, kind of like in the real world once you get a job. Also, some programs explicitly provide financial literacy counseling. So this can be seen in some wraparound programs. So it really depends on the program, but I would say that we have run across several programs that do incorporate either in the way that the money is distributed or specifically, you know, students are receiving counseling from an individual on how to manage the money more effectively.
Wonderful. Next, did you find through your research which type of models are showing the most promise in terms of persistence and completion? For this question, I would say we did run across some
some models that have more rigorous evaluations in which students have been randomly assigned to either a control group or a group receiving the scholarship aid, which I kind of highlighted throughout the presentation. So, for example, that Dream Keepers program that I talked about, which is an emergency scholarship program, that program, students who received the aid, 95% were completed the term in which they were enrolled, and I believe it was 88% enrolled in the following semester. And so this is really impressive. Additionally, Destination Graduation, which is another an example of an emergency scholarship program that I briefly touched on in the presentation, they've done some evaluation of their work as well, and they found that individuals receiving emergency financial aid as well as those wraparound supports, 83% enrolled in the following semester compared to 61% of students who were kind of a comparison group who did not receive the destination graduation funding. And so these are really promising results. Also, the performance-based scholarships, as I had mentioned, they have also shown some great results. So for example, that MAPS program in Florida, for those developmental ed students, we've seen some really promising results with that as well. And that was a very rigorous evaluation that was conducted of that program, as well as kind of that 6-state evaluation that was conducted, finding that students who receive performance-based scholarship funding are more likely to persist and complete and also complete their degrees in a more timely manner. So
those are some
I
great.
will say, and just to add,
Yep.
I will add to Michelle's that, and that's where the challenge is some of these newer programs just haven't been around long enough for the studies to actually be done, and the other challenge is just wanting to invest that type of money to do some of the studies required. I think most organizations would rather give more scholarships, so trying to balance that to figure out where we can identify the effectiveness, that'll be something that all of these organizations will have to think about going forward.
Those are some great examples. Thanks for sharing that. Our next question is, to what extent do you feel scholarship funding models are sustainable? Should we also be working consecutively on trying to manage the cost of college? Data shows that the low-income students will soon be the majority of all students. Scholarships alone will not be able to sustain such a student population. Have you studied other alternative funding models such as low-interest loans?
Unfortunately, at this time, we haven't. We really would love to. I mean, this was kind of the first step that we took in this process in partnering with FCAN and FPN was to look at the scholarship models. I know, Kathy, you're going to talk about it a little bit with the affinity group, but we haven't gone to that next level of connecting that to other kind of low cost and sustainability ways to think about this. But that's this great question and the great next step that we'd like to build on in the future.
Well, and as you discussed, this is really about, beginning to try things, B, evaluate what's working and what's not, and then kind of going the next step. So I think it's part of a bigger conversation on affordability. But for the purposes of today's call, you mentioned having a plan with goals in mind before designing a scholarship program. Do you have an example of a group that did this planning stage well that you can share?
Sure. So again, I would go back to that destination graduation program that's taking place at Seminole State. They did a really great job of, doing work at the forefront in order to ensure that set up their program for success. So some examples of what they did is they really did some good work in assessing the needs of their community. They looked at the population that typically attends Seminole State and found that most are non-traditional students. They have, many veteran, low-income, first-generation students who are parents. And so they really wanted to design their scholarship program to ensure that they were best fitting the needs of those students. They also looked at the forefront reasons why students discontinue studies. And so they conducted interviews and spoke to students, those who had stopped out to find out why. And this really helped to inform their program. And they also worked to leverage partnerships. And so they looked within the community to see, who would be a good partner for this type of work, and United Way, which has kind of a 2-1-1 model that connects students to resources within the community, was able to partner with Seminole State, which that institutional resource. And so this is a really great partnership for both of them to leverage their resources and work together to ensure student post-secondary success. They also did a great job at the forefront in planning for how they were going to collect data and evaluate the success of their program. So this included things like, surveying students, looking at persistence rates and ensuring that they had access to that kind of data, and then also looking at, the success of the different ways that they were marketing the program. So was the 2-on-1 model effective, for example, in helping connecting students to resources? Were their outreach efforts effective in being able to reach their target population? So those are just some examples of some of the work that they did at the forefront to ensure that their program was successful.
Okay, those were some great examples. Unfortunately, we're reaching the conclusion. If there are any additional questions that people would like to ask, Michelle and Paul both shared their contact information, so please feel free to reach out to them. Okay, so first, many thanks to Paul and Michelle for sharing their work that helps to inform and inspire all of our funders to test new models of financial support. Whoops, let me try advancing the slides. There we go. Okay, want to remind the audience our summit is coming up this May, so save the date. We are featuring over 30 breakout sessions on topic tracks that include college access, post-secondary success, college affordability, career readiness, workforce development, data and measurement, and collective impact. We're also pleased to welcome keynote speaker Jamie Cassup, who is Google's education evangelist. He has a unique way to inspire students to envision a compelling future that motivates action, so you won't want to miss him. You'll also be together with over 300 college and career readiness professionals from throughout the state. We're expecting this to be our biggest and best summit yet. And you can catch Paul and Michelle presenting in one of those breakout sessions, examining trends in college persistence, findings and implications for college success. So please, if you join the summit, check out their session. There's 2 additional sessions that you might be interested in based on today's topics. One is the Top 10 Financial Aid Myths, that's led by a financial aid administrator, Daniel Barkowitz. And then finally, Career Quest, which is a matched college savings program, sharing a pilot on a matched college savings program targeting low-income high school juniors that includes a 4-to-1 match savings program with other components to help students prepare. A little bit similar to that Raise Me example that Michelle shared earlier. Finally, join us for our next webinar next month, Getting to the Finish Line, the Unique Post-Secondary Barriers Adult Students Face. Our guest speaker will be Dr. Michelle Horton at Complete Florida. You can register for all of these and other events at floridacollegeaccess.org/events. And if you want to ensure that you hear about upcoming webinars, legislative updates, events, and policy brief releases, please subscribe at floridacollegeaccess.org. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.